Duke Julian Harcourt ended his marriage by accusing his lawful wife of adultery before Parliament, and announced his engagement to an heiress before the ink on the Divorce Act had dried. Standing beneath the chandeliers of Harcourt House, Eleanor watched servants remove her portrait, while Julian's solicitor handed her a single trunk and ordered her gone before midnight. Julian believed he had discarded a penniless woman. He had forgotten that Eleanor had managed his accounts for 9 years, and that her uncle directed one of the Crown's most powerful private banks. She left without pleading. Within weeks, anonymous buyers began acquiring the neglected mortgages, gambling notes, and agricultural loans attached to Julian's name. On the morning of his new wedding, scarlet foreclosure seals appeared on the gates of 3 Harcourt estates, but one document troubled Eleanor, a debt bearing Julian's genuine signature, dated on a night when she knew he had been unconscious, and secured against land he had never legally owned. 9 years earlier, Eleanor Ashford had entered Harcourt House, carrying neither a fashionable dowry nor the illusions expected of a young bride. She had brought ledgers. Her father, a respected financier who died before seeing her married, had taught her to read an estate's accounts as other women read music. Columns of figures revealed vanity, fear, waste, and deceit. A late payment could expose a dishonest steward. An unusually generous harvest estimate might conceal grain being sold privately. A loan renewed too often was rarely a temporary inconvenience. When Eleanor married Julian, the Harcourt estates appeared magnificent from the road. Their tiled roofs shone above ancient oaks. Their tenants bowed to carriages bearing the silver stag of the dukedom, yet behind the stone walls, the family was suffocating beneath inherited debt. Julian had been 28 then, proud, charming, and sufficiently frightened to admit the truth in private. "If the northern farms fail again," he had told her on the 3rd evening of their marriage, "I may have to sell Wexford wood." Eleanor had looked across the library desk at the scattered bills. "No," she replied, "you must dismiss the agent who has been reporting harvests that never existed." Julian's expression hardened at first. Men bearing his title were not accustomed to correction, especially from wives 3 days removed from the altar, but Eleanor showed him the duplicated transport charges, the altered weights, and the payments routed through a fictitious merchant in Bristol. The corrupt agent was dismissed within a fortnight. The stolen money was recovered. Wexford wood remained part of the estate. That winter Julian kissed her hands and called her his deliverance. For years, they worked together after dinner. Julian opened correspondence while Eleanor examined accounts. She refinanced the oldest mortgages, persuaded creditors to reduce punitive interest, and converted unproductive hunting land into tenant farms. When a failed harvest threatened 3 villages, she arranged grain credit through her uncle, Sir Matthew Ashford, without allowing a single family to be evicted. The newspapers praised Julian as a modern and capable landowner. Eleanor never asked that they print her name. Her reward was the quiet satisfaction of watching cottages repaired, wages paid, and the balance in the estate accounts gradually move from red ink toward black. More privately, she believed she had built something lasting with her husband, not merely solvency, but trust. That belief began to die during the London season. Miss Arabella Vale arrived at Almack's wearing emeralds large enough to attract attention from across the ballroom. She was 23, newly orphaned, and reputed to possess £80,000, shipping interests, and a country house unburdened by mortgages. Julian danced with her 3 times on the first evening. By the end of the month, he had stopped joining Eleanor in the library. "You concern yourself too much with accounts," he told her when she asked why he had taken £2,000 from the estate reserve. "A duchess should understand that appearances protect a family as effectively as money. Appearances do not pay interest." His mouth tightened. "Must every conversation with you become an audit?" The cruelty lay not in the words themselves, but in the contempt with which he now treated the skill that had saved him. Eleanor soon learned that he had begun gambling at Lord Fenwick's private club. He purchased a racing colt without consulting her, and promised funds to a parliamentary campaign they could not afford. Each time she objected, Julian accused her of humiliating him. Arabella, meanwhile, admired everything Eleanor questioned. She laughed at Julian's wagers, praised his political ambitions, and spoke of the Harcourt estates as if she had already chosen new curtains for them. Her fortune made extravagance appear harmless. Beside her, Eleanor became an inconvenient witness to every consequence Julian wished to ignore. Then Julian removed Eleanor's authority over the household accounts. His solicitor delivered the notice on a gray Tuesday morning. The document transferred control to Julian's new private secretary, Mr. Benedict Shaw, a smooth, soft-spoken man who had previously managed portions of the Vale inheritance. Eleanor read the notice twice. On what grounds? The solicitor avoided her eyes. His Grace believes your methods have become restrictive. His Grace owes £47,000. The man's face changed. It was only a flicker, but Eleanor saw it. According to the books in her possession, Julian owed slightly more than $28,000. "Where did you hear the larger figure?" she asked quietly. "I misspoke." "No, you did not." He gathered his papers too quickly and left without waiting for a servant to escort him. That night, Eleanor entered the library and found 3 shelves of financial records missing. Julian stood beside the cold fireplace with Benedict Shaw. On the desk lay a packet sealed in black wax. "You are not permitted to examine those accounts again," Julian said. "I am your wife, and my marriage settlement guarantees me oversight of any debt secured against my income." Not for much longer. For a moment, the room became utterly still. Benedict lowered his gaze, but Eleanor detected satisfaction at the corner of his mouth. Julian pushed the sealed packet toward her. Inside was a petition alleging that Eleanor had committed adultery with Thomas Wren, the estate's married chief accountant. The accusation was supported by letters she had never written and testimony from 2 servants she had dismissed for theft. Eleanor raised her eyes to her husband. "You know this is false." Julian's jaw tightened. Behind his anger, she saw something worse than belief. She saw choice. "Arabella's trustees will not release her fortune while I remain married to you," he said. There it was. Not jealousy, not heartbreak, not even doubt. A calculation. "You intend to destroy my name so you may purchase hers. I intend to save this family. I have spent 9 years saving it, and ensured that everyone knows I could not survive without you." Eleanor looked at the forged letters, then at the man whose reputation she had protected at the cost of her own recognition. "You could withdraw this petition tonight." Julian hesitated. It was the last clean choice he would be offered. Then Benedict placed one hand upon the black-sealed packet and said, "Parliament has already received a copy." Julian did not order him to retrieve it. Instead, he looked directly at Eleanor and said, "You should begin packing." Before she could answer, a violent crash sounded from the corridor. The door opened, and Thomas Wren stumbled into the library with blood running from his temple. In his hand was a torn loan certificate bearing Julian's signature. "Your Grace," he gasped, looking not at the Duke but at Eleanor. "They have borrowed against land that does not belong to him." Thomas Wren collapsed against the doorframe before Eleanor could reach him. She caught his arm while Julian shouted for a servant. Blood had soaked through Thomas's collar, but his fingers remained clenched around the torn certificate. "Who did this?" Eleanor asked. "2 men in the records room." Thomas struggled for breath. "They were destroying the original securities." Benedict Shaw stepped forward. "He should be taken downstairs." "No." Eleanor drew the certificate from Thomas's hand. "He remains where I can see him." The document recorded a loan of £12,000 from Vale Consolidated Holdings to Julian Harcourt. The signature appeared genuine. The security, however, was Westmere Farm, a profitable property belonging to Eleanor under her marriage settlement. Julian could not legally mortgage it without her consent. Her supposed signature appeared beneath his. Eleanor studied the handwriting. It resembled hers closely, but the final stroke curved inward. She always finished her surname with a straight descending line, a habit inherited from her father. "This is forged." Julian took the certificate. Surprise flashed across his face before he concealed it with anger. "Another of your accusations. You know I never signed this. I know only that you controlled my accounts and now claim to remember whichever transactions suit you." Thomas raised his head. "Your Grace, I witnessed the Duke sign it. The Duchess was not present. Benedict's expression remained calm. A convenient statement from the man named as her lover. The room fell silent. Eleanor understood immediately. Thomas had not been attacked merely because he discovered the false security. Whoever created the adultery allegation had chosen him because his knowledge of the estate accounts made him dangerous. Julian looked from Thomas to Eleanor. Why was he searching my private records tonight? Because I asked him to identify the missing ledgers, Eleanor replied. So you admit meeting him secretly. I admit trying to prevent you from destroying what remains of your estate. Julian's face reddened. Take him away. 2 footmen entered, but Eleanor stood between them and Thomas. If Mr. Wren leaves this room, he goes under the protection of my uncle's physician. You no longer command this household. Then give that order yourself, Julian. Send an injured man into the street because his testimony inconveniences your new marriage. For one uncertain moment, Julian hesitated. Eleanor saw that he was not yet comfortable with the ugliness of what he had chosen. He wanted her ruined, but he still wanted to think himself honorable. Benedict broke the silence. The Duke cannot shelter the man accused of violating his marriage. Imagine how Parliament would interpret such indulgence. Julian's shame hardened into resentment. Remove him. Eleanor did not plead. She helped Thomas stand and accompanied him downstairs. Julian followed as far as the entrance hall. You are not leaving with him, he said. I will return before midnight to collect my possessions. If you cross that door, society will regard it as an admission. Society has already received the lie you purchased. She paused before him, close enough to see exhaustion beneath his anger. You still have time to tell Parliament the letters are false, and lose Arabella's fortune. The answer escaped before he could disguise it. Eleanor nodded once. At least now, we both understand the price of my reputation. Outside, rain struck the carriage roof as Thomas was lifted inside. Eleanor ordered the coachman to drive to Sir Matthew Ashford's London residence. Thomas drifted in and out of consciousness during the journey. Just before they reached Grosvenor Square, he caught Eleanor's wrist. The certificate was not the only one. How many? I saw 6. Westmere, Dunleigh, the Ashford cottages, and 3 parcels marked only with numbers. The Ashford cottages belong to my uncle. Thomas nodded weakly. That is why they burned the ledgers. The loans are not merely covering the Duke's gambling. Someone is using his name to seize properties his title cannot touch. Who authorized the payments? Shaw prepared them, but the money never entered the Harcourt accounts. The carriage stopped before her uncle's house. Servants carried Thomas inside, while Eleanor remained beneath the portico, staring at the certificate. Julian had signed a loan secured by land he did not own. Whether through desperation, arrogance, or deliberate fraud, he had given Benedict the instrument needed to steal from her family. Sir Matthew received her in his study, wearing a dark dressing gown over his evening clothes. At 57, he possessed the stillness of a man accustomed to making powerful people wait. He read the certificate without interrupting her. When she finished, he placed it on the desk. Will you defend the divorce petition? He asked. I will expose every forged letter. That was not my question. Eleanor looked at him. Her uncle opened a locked drawer and removed a thick bundle of documents tied with blue ribbon. These arrived at the bank over the past 4 months. Harcourt mortgages, private notes, unpaid wagers, agricultural loans. Someone has been offering them quietly to buyers at severe discounts. Why did you not tell me? Because Julian remained your husband, and you spent 9 years protecting him from consequences. The rebuke was gentle but exact. Sir Matthew pushed the bundle toward her. If Parliament grants his divorce, you may spend years trying to convince society that you were an innocent wife. Eleanor touched the first mortgage. Or, you may become his largest creditor. She examined the documents one by one. Julian had borrowed against nearly everything: mills, farms, hunting grounds, London houses, even the income from tenant leases. Together, the debts could give their owner power over the entire Harcourt estate. What would it cost to purchase them? Almost everything your father left you. Eleanor thought of her portrait being removed, Thomas bleeding on the library floor, and Julian asking whether Arabella's fortune mattered more than the truth. Buy them through separate companies, she said. He must not know they are mine. Sir Matthew studied her carefully. And when they mature? I will collect every pound. A knock sounded at the study door. The butler entered carrying a small wooden box discovered beneath the injured accountant's coat. Inside lay a brass key and a strip of paper bearing 6 property numbers. Across the bottom, in Thomas's handwriting, were 4 words. The heiress owns nothing. Sir Matthew lifted the paper toward the lamp. The heiress owns nothing, he repeated. A dramatic claim. Does Wren know what it means? He is not conscious enough to ask. Eleanor examined the brass key. A tiny crown and the number 17 had been engraved into its head. A bank deposit box, Sir Matthew said, but not one from my institution. He summoned his senior clerk, Mr. Bell, who recognized the mark as belonging to Temple & Row, a private bank used by several aristocratic families. The bank would open at 9. Until then, Eleanor could do nothing except prepare. She spent the remaining hours sorting Julian's debts into 3 groups, those legitimately incurred, those recklessly accepted, and those secured by property he did not own. By dawn, one pattern had emerged. Nearly every suspicious note had passed through a company linked to Arabella's late father, Cyrus Vale. Yet the supposed heiress had inherited nothing directly. Her fortune was controlled by trustees, and Benedict Shaw was one of them. At 9, Eleanor entered Temple & Row wearing a dark veil. Sir Matthew accompanied her, carrying the authority that opened doors even when keys alone could not. The manager resisted until he saw Thomas's signed instruction folded around the key. Deposit box 17 contained no jewels or money. Inside lay copies of 6 mortgage certificates, a small account book, and a list of payments made to witnesses in Eleanor's divorce case. 2 names belonged to the servants who claimed to have seen her enter Thomas's bedroom. Each had received £100 from Benedict Shaw. Sir Matthew's face became cold. This can destroy the adultery allegation. It can prove the witnesses were paid, Eleanor replied. But Shaw will claim the money concerned something else. She opened the account book. It recorded large transfers from Vale Consolidated Holdings into temporary accounts, followed by withdrawals in cash. Julian's loans had supplied the money, but none of it had supported the Harcourt estates. On the final page, Eleanor found 3 planned transactions dated after Julian's wedding. Westmere Farm would pass to Vale Consolidated. Dunleigh Mill would be auctioned. The Ashford cottages would be cleared and sold to a canal company. They intend to use Julian's marriage to validate the securities, she said. Once Arabella becomes Duchess, her trustees will claim the Vale loans were made to preserve the Harcourt estates. Julian will be too dependent upon them to object, and your forged consent allows them to seize Westmere. Eleanor closed the book. Julian believes he is marrying a fortune. In truth, he is marrying his largest fraud. Sir Matthew urged her to take the documents directly to Parliament. Eleanor refused. If we expose Shaw today, he will destroy whatever originals remain and blame dead clerks. I need proof that Julian knew the securities were false. You still hope he was deceived? No, her answer came without hesitation. I need to establish precisely how willingly he helped them. When Eleanor returned to Grosvenor Square, she found a carriage bearing the Harcourt crest outside. Julian waited alone in the drawing room. His clothes were unchanged from the previous night. He looked tired, but not repentant. You took documents belonging to me, he said. Thomas carried evidence of a crime committed against my property. Shaw says the certificate was an unfinished draft. Then why was Thomas attacked for finding it? Julian ignored the question. Return every paper. No, he stared at her as though the word itself were an offense. Eleanor moved closer. Did you know Westmere was named as security? I signed what was required to obtain the loan. Did you see my consent? Shaw assured me it existed. You knew I would never give it. Julian turned toward the window. Arabella's money will repay everything after the wedding. No property will actually be taken. There was the admission Eleanor needed, not of forgery, but of deliberate blindness. You allowed a false document to be used because you expected another woman's fortune to conceal it. I was saving Harcourt. You were saving your pride. His composure broke. You made me a guest in my own house. Every steward sought your approval. Every creditor trusted your word before mine. Even the tenants thanked you for decisions issued under my name. And so you chose ruin, provided it called you master. Julian stepped toward her, but Sir Matthew entered before he could answer. The two men faced one another in silence. Sir Matthew placed a sealed notice on the table. Your Grace, Ashford Bank will no longer extend credit to any enterprise carrying your signature. Julian went pale. You cannot withdraw support without warning. I have just warned you. The harvest wages are due in 12 days. Then ask your heiress. Julian looked at Eleanor. For the first time, uncertainty replaced his contempt. You arranged this. No, she said. I merely stopped preventing it. He left without another word. That afternoon, Sir Matthew's agents began purchasing Julian's debts through 4 separate companies. By evening, they controlled the mortgages on 2 farms and his London residence. But just before midnight, Mr. Bell arrived with alarming news. Someone else was buying the same debts and offering twice their value. He placed a purchase order before Eleanor. It bore Arabella Vale's signature. Beneath it was a handwritten instruction: acquire every Harcourt obligation before Eleanor Ashford discovers what they conceal. Eleanor read Arabella's instruction twice. Acquire every Harcourt obligation before Eleanor Ashford discovers what they conceal. The order confirmed that Arabella was not merely an heiress following Benedict Shaw's advice. She knew the debts hid something dangerous, and she feared Eleanor more than she feared the Duke's insolvency. Can we outbid her? Sir Matthew asked. We should not try. Her uncle raised an eyebrow. Eleanor separated Julian's obligations into 2 piles. On the left, she placed the mortgages secured against Harcourt House, Dunleigh Mill, and the farms along the proposed canal route. On the right, she placed gambling notes, club debts, racing accounts, and unsecured promises. Let Arabella purchase these, Eleanor said, indicating the second pile. She may pay twice their value for the privilege of demanding money Julian does not possess. And the secured debts? We buy only those containing inspection rights, control of income, or cross-default clauses. I do not need to own everything he owes. I need the debts that command the others. Sir Matthew studied her for a moment, then summoned Mr. Bell and issued the orders. Before they could be dispatched, a Harcourt carriage stopped outside the bank. Julian entered the private office without Benedict. His coat was perfectly fastened, but sleeplessness had darkened the skin beneath his eyes. My creditors are selling my obligations without notifying me, he said. Creditors are not required to seek a debtor's permission before selling what he failed to repay, Eleanor answered. You are encouraging them. I am purchasing what you willingly signed. Julian glanced at the papers covering the desk. His expression changed when he recognized the mortgage on Harcourt House. You would take my home? You tried to mortgage mine. That document was never meant to be enforced. Then you admit you knew Westmere was named as security. Julian's silence answered before he did. Benedict said the loan would be repaid after my marriage to Arabella. No property would actually change hands. And what happens if Arabella's fortune does not exist? His eyes narrowed. You have always despised her. I have never needed to despise a balance sheet. Eleanor placed the Vale purchase order before him, followed by a summary of the company's known holdings. The ships were mortgaged. The country house belonged to a holding company. Nearly every large deposit had arrived through temporary loans and disappeared within days. Julian read the figures, but his hand remained upon the papers, as if refusing to release them could prevent their meaning from becoming real. Copies can be manufactured, he said. So can fortunes. You expect me to accept this because your uncle's clerks prepared it. No, I expect you to examine the original Vale accounts yourself. Eleanor pushed a written proposal across the desk. It required Julian to suspend the divorce petition, dismiss Benedict Shaw, open every Harcourt and Vale ledger to an independent audit, and publicly withdraw the accusation against Thomas Wren until the alleged letters could be authenticated. If the accounts prove Arabella wealthy and the letters genuine, Eleanor said, I will bear the humiliation of having demanded the inquiry. And if they do not, You will have prevented a fraud before it consumes what remains of Harcourt. Julian stared at the proposal. For 9 years, Eleanor had solved every crisis placed before him. Even now, after he had accused her publicly and ordered her from his house, she was offering him a path that preserved his tenants, his ancestral estate, and perhaps part of his reputation. But the path required him to admit that he might have been wrong. It required him to trust the wife whose competence had become unbearable to him. Arabella's trustees will withdraw their support if I delay the divorce, he said. Then let them. A genuine fortune can survive an audit. You know what Parliament will think if I retreat now. That you chose truth before committing a greater wrong. His mouth tightened. They will think my wife frightened me into submission. Eleanor saw the decision settle inside him, not suddenly, but with the familiar rigidity of pride disguising itself as duty. She removed one final document from the folder. It was a copy of the agreement Thomas had found among Benedict's missing accounts. Upon Julian's marriage to Arabella and the transfer of Westmere, £5,000 would be deposited into Julian's private account. His signature appeared beneath the promise. You were not merely deceived, Eleanor said. You demanded payment. Julian's face lost its color. That money was intended to settle urgent obligations. It was payment for surrendering land you did not own. I was going to repay it. With Arabella's imaginary fortune, he pushed the agreement away. I will not permit you to turn every desperate choice into a crime. This is your last opportunity, Julian. Suspend the petition. Open the accounts. Tell Parliament the letters were never verified. For several seconds, neither moved. Then Julian tore the proposal in half. The wedding will proceed. Eleanor looked at the pieces falling onto the desk. Whatever uncertainty remained inside her disappeared with them. She turned to Sir Matthew. Purchase the senior Harcourt mortgages. At noon, notify every lender that the forged Westmere security constitutes a default. Julian froze. Eleanor met his gaze without anger. You have made your choice. Now I will make mine. Before Julian reached the door, Mr. Bell entered carrying an urgent message from Dunleigh. Benedict Shaw's men had arrived at the mill with orders bearing Julian's seal, and they were removing the original property registers before the bank could inspect them. Julian seized the message from Mr. Bell. I gave no order to remove the Dunleigh registers, but Benedict's men are carrying documents bearing your seal, Eleanor said. He has authority to use it for estate business. You gave the man negotiating false mortgages unrestricted access to the symbol that makes those transactions appear lawful. Julian looked down at the torn proposal scattered across the desk. For an instant, Eleanor thought he might reconsider. Instead, he folded the message and placed it inside his coat. I will speak to Shaw. You will warn him that we know. I will prevent him from exceeding his authority. He exceeded it months ago. You simply approved each result without asking how it was achieved. Julian left without answering. Eleanor did not attempt to stop the removal of the registers. By the time a solicitor obtained an injunction and sent officers to Dunleigh, Benedict's men would already be gone. Pursuing them would reveal which documents mattered most. Instead, she turned to Mr. Bell. Send a clerk to follow the wagons. No confrontation. I want to know where the registers are taken. Then she directed Sir Matthew's agents to begin purchasing the selected Harcourt obligations. The first was the mortgage on Harcourt House. It had been issued 12 years earlier and renewed twice after Eleanor reduced its interest. Julian had neglected the most recent payment. More importantly, the agreement allowed the lender to seek appointment of a receiver if fraud threatened the value of the security. The second obligation covered the income from Dunleigh Mill. Whoever controlled it could redirect the mill's profits before they reached Julian. The third was an agricultural loan attached to 3 northern farms. Buried in its final pages was a cross-default clause. If Julian was proven to have pledged property he did not own, every payment became due immediately. Sir Matthew read the clause and glanced at Eleanor. One forged signature could mature all 3 obligations, which is why Benedict is removing the original registers. By afternoon, Ashford Bank had acquired the 3 debts through separate purchasing companies. The cost was substantial, but far below the total value of the properties they controlled. Arabella's agents responded within an hour. They purchased Julian's racing debts at nearly twice their value. Then they acquired his unpaid account at Lord Fenwick's club and 2 private notes issued after nights of gambling. Mr. Bell entered carrying the reports. Should we counter their offers? No, Eleanor said. Encourage the sellers to wait another hour before accepting. Arabella may raise her bid. Sir Matthew almost smiled. You are increasing the price of debts you do not want. She believes quantity will make her Julian's most powerful creditor. Let her learn the difference between holding a man's embarrassment and holding his income. The strategy worked. By evening, Arabella controlled more of Julian's individual obligations than Eleanor did, but most carried no property, rents, or commercial income as security. She had spent thousands purchasing the right to demand money from a man who had none. Eleanor controlled the house in which he lived, the mill that produced his most reliable income, and the clause capable of bringing every secured lender to his door. At Harcourt House, the consequences had already begun. The wine merchant refused to deliver the remaining cases ordered for the wedding. The stablemaster demanded payment before providing feed. A jeweler sent notice that Arabella's wedding necklace would not be released without cash. Benedict dismissed each demand as temporary. You told me the Vale trustees would release £10,000, Julian said in the library. They will release it once your divorce is approved. The creditors may not wait 3 weeks. Then give them another security. There is nothing left that is not already pledged. Benedict looked toward the shelves where the estate registers had once stood. There is always something left when ownership is properly interpreted. Julian understood enough to feel uneasy. Where are the Dunleigh records? Being protected from Eleanor. She knows they were removed. Then we must ensure that what she finds later supports our version of events. Benedict placed a fresh authorization before him. It allowed the transfer of old estate records to Harcourt Abbey for examination and disposal of duplicates. Julian did not sign immediately. Does disposal mean destruction? It means removing documents that no longer carry legal force. Eleanor says the Vale fortune is built on borrowed money. For the first time, Benedict's calm expression hardened. Eleanor has spent 9 years making you believe no decision is safe unless she approves it. If you return to her now, she will control you for the rest of your life. Julian looked at the authorization. Then he remembered Eleanor's proposal and the humiliation he imagined would follow if he accepted it. He signed. Across London, Eleanor received 2 pieces of news almost simultaneously. The first came from Temple and Row. Arabella had placed nearly all the liquid funds remaining in the Vale accounts into purchasing Julian's worthless private notes. Benedict's illusion of wealth was beginning to consume itself. The second came from the clerk following the Dunleigh wagons. The registers had been taken to Harcourt Abbey and locked in the old records chamber. 2 Vale guards stood outside, while Benedict's clerk sorted the volumes into separate piles. One pile was marked for preservation, the other was marked for burning. Eleanor rose and reached for her gloves. Sir Matthew blocked the door. You cannot enter the Abbey without lawful authority. I do not intend to force my way inside. She placed the newly acquired Harcourt mortgage before him and pointed to its inspection clause. Petition for a receiver tonight. Inform the court that the debtor's agent is destroying records connected to the pledged property. A bank messenger departed with the documents. Minutes later, Thomas Wren was carried into the office, pale but conscious. In his hand lay a narrow page he had removed from the records room before the attack. It listed the numbers of the 6 disputed properties beside Eleanor's forged signature, but beneath them appeared another signature she had not seen before, Julian Harcourt's, and beside his name, in Benedict's handwriting, were 5 words, "He knows the consent is false." Thomas's page did not merely prove Julian knew Eleanor's consent was false, it connected his signature to all 6 properties along the proposed canal route. Sir Matthew examined the ink beneath a magnifying lens. This note was written at the time of signing, he said, but Benedict will call it a private memorandum unless we recover the original register. Then we recover it before he burns it, Eleanor replied. The court approved their emergency petition shortly after dawn. A receiver was authorized to inspect Harcourt Abbey's financial records and prevent the destruction of documents affecting mortgaged property. Eleanor traveled with Sir Matthew, the receiver, 2 solicitors, and a magistrate's clerk. Thomas remained in London, but before they departed, he drew a plan of the records chamber and marked the iron deed box where Benedict stored the original securities. Smoke was already rising above the eastern wing when their carriage reached Harcourt Abbey. Estate workers ran across the courtyard carrying buckets. A window in the old records chamber glowed orange behind its curtains. Julian stood beneath the archway, shouting orders. When he saw Eleanor, anger and fear crossed his face at once. "You have no right to enter." The receiver presented the court order. "We have both the right and the duty. Your agent is destroying records pledged to your creditors. I ordered no fire." Eleanor looked at the smoke spreading beneath the roof. "No. You only signed an authorization allowing Benedict to dispose of whatever he called unnecessary." Julian's expression revealed that he understood. The records chamber door had been locked from the outside. 2 workers broke it open with an iron bar. Heat rolled into the corridor, followed by burning fragments of paper. Inside, flames had consumed 1 wall of shelving. Ledgers marked for destruction lay piled beneath a fallen curtain. The fire had been arranged to spread quickly while leaving the newer Vale files near the opposite wall untouched. "This is not an accident," the receiver said. A young clerk climbed through a rear window and fled toward the stables. One of the magistrate's men pursued him, but Benedict was nowhere in sight. Eleanor covered her mouth with a wet cloth and pointed toward the stone alcove Thomas had marked. "The deed box is behind that cabinet." Julian stepped toward the flames. "You cannot go in." "I do not intend to." She called 4 estate workers by name and directed them to pull the cabinet away using chains from the courtyard. These were men she had paid and protected during failed harvests. They obeyed her without waiting for Julian's permission. The cabinet collapsed forward. Behind it stood the iron box, blackened by smoke but not yet reached by the flames. Within minutes, the workers dragged it into the courtyard. Eleanor immediately ordered that every man who had fought the fire receive double wages from the funds Sir Matthew had advanced. Julian watched his own steward record the payments under Eleanor's authority. She had come to seize evidence against him, yet she was still protecting the people his decisions had endangered. The receiver opened the box in the presence of the magistrate's clerk. Inside lay the original Westmere mortgage, the register of the 6 numbered properties, the agreement promising Julian £5,000, and letters showing payments to the 2 servants who had accused Eleanor of adultery. One final document proved the full design. It was a contract granting a canal company exclusive passage through the 6 properties once Westmere transferred out of Eleanor's control. The sale price exceeded the Harcourt debts several times over. Benedict intended to use part of the payment to preserve the appearance of Arabella's fortune, then leave Julian responsible for every obligation that remained. Julian read the contract over Eleanor's shoulder. "He told me Westmere would never actually be taken. He needed it taken," she said. "It was the only property dividing the corridor. I did not know about this agreement. You knew my signature was false." Julian looked at the burned records scattered across the courtyard. "I believed the marriage would repay everything. You believed whatever allowed you to receive Arabella's money without examining its source." The magistrate's men returned with Benedict's clerk. In his coat they found a purse of Vale coins, a bottle of lamp oil, and written instructions ordering him to destroy the original Harcourt registers before the receiver arrived. The instructions bore Benedict's signature. They also carried Julian's authorization for the disposal of records. Julian stared at his own name. "I did not authorize arson." "No," Eleanor said. "You merely gave a dishonest man the power to decide which truth should survive." She handed the recovered documents to the receiver, who sealed them inside an evidence case. Certified copies would go to Parliament, the magistrate, and Ashford Bank. The forged Westmere security now constituted documented fraud. Under the clauses Eleanor had purchased, the mortgages on Harcourt House, Dunleigh Mill, and the northern farms could all be declared in default. Julian understood what that meant. If you enforce those debts, the estate will lose its income before the wedding. The wedding is the reason Benedict needed the fraud completed. Give me time to question Arabella. I gave you time yesterday. You tore it in half. A messenger arrived from London before Eleanor departed. Parliament's committee had received Thomas's preliminary statement and learned of the fire. An emergency hearing would be held in 4 days. Julian looked toward the ruined records chamber. Will you accuse me of planning this? I will tell them exactly what you did, Eleanor replied. Benedict may have lit the fire, but you supplied the authority, the false accusation, and the signature that made his scheme possible. Then the receiver delivered 3 notices into Julian's hands. Unless the fraud was disproved, or the full balance paid, his secured debts would mature at 9 o'clock on the morning appointed for his new wedding. Arabella arrived at Ashford Bank the morning after the fire, accompanied by Benedict's solicitor. She wore emerald silk and the expression of a woman determined to appear wealthy after her money had begun disappearing. I demand the release of the Vale accounts, she said. Your bank has no authority to prevent me from using my inheritance. Eleanor placed 3 documents before her. The first showed that Arabella's country house belonged to Vale Consolidated Holdings. The second listed mortgages exceeding the value of the Vale ships. The third traced the same borrowed £10,000 through 4 companies, each presenting it as new capital. This is your inheritance, Eleanor said. The same money moved repeatedly until no one remembered where it began. Arabella did not touch the papers. Benedict says your uncle manufactured these claims to ruin my wedding. Benedict also instructed his clerk to burn the original registers. The clerk has confessed. The solicitor beside Arabella shifted uneasily. Eleanor opened another folder. Inside was an unsigned declaration prepared 3 weeks earlier. It accused Arabella of directing the false loans, bribing Eleanor's witnesses, and concealing the insolvency of her father's companies. Arabella's confidence finally broke. Where did you obtain that? From Benedict's deed box. He prepared it in case the investors demanded an explanation. He prepared it so they would receive yours. The declaration identified Arabella as the sole beneficiary of the fraud. Benedict appeared only as a trustee, acting upon her instructions. If the scheme collapsed, she would face prosecution, while he claimed to have been deceived. Arabella dismissed her solicitor and waited until the door closed. What do you want? The correspondence proving Benedict designed the scheme, the names of the clerks who moved the money, and your testimony that you knew the accusation against me was false. If I testify, society will destroy me. You were willing to let it destroy me. Arabella looked away. Eleanor felt no sympathy. The young woman had known an innocent wife was being branded an adulteress and had continued because she wanted the Harcourt title. If you remain silent, Eleanor continued, Benedict's statement becomes the only account of what happened. You will carry every debt and every criminal charge. And if I cooperate? I will tell the committee when you began assisting the investigation, nothing more. You will not protect me? No. The answer appeared to surprise Arabella more than any threat. After a long silence, she removed a small key from her reticule. It opened a cabinet in the Vale office, containing Benedict's private correspondence. By evening, Sir Matthew's clerks had recovered 2 account books, 4 letters to the bribed witnesses, and a draft agreement promising Arabella £20,000 from the sale of the canal corridor. The most damaging letter was addressed to a group of investors. Benedict wrote that Julian's marriage to Arabella would place the Harcourt title behind the Vale companies, allowing them to attract enough new money to repay the oldest loans. Once the corridor was sold, Benedict intended to withdraw the remaining funds and leave Julian responsible for the debts issued in his name. Arabella read the letter twice. He told me we would both be wealthy. He told Julian the same thing. Eleanor required her to sign a sworn statement. Arabella admitted that she knew the alleged love letters were false, had helped purchase Julian's debts, and had expected to profit from Eleanor losing Westmere. Her cooperation did not erase her guilt. It merely prevented Benedict from assigning all of his own to her. That evening, Eleanor sent certified copies to Parliament and the magistrate. 1 copy went to Julian. He came to the bank after dark with Benedict's letter crushed in his hand. There is no Vale fortune, he said. No? And the money Arabella used to purchase my debts? Borrowed against companies that were already insolvent. Julian lowered himself into a chair. His new marriage, his political future, and the rescue he had used to justify destroying Eleanor had never existed. I surrendered you for nothing. Eleanor looked at him across the desk. No, Julian, you surrendered me for what you believed was money. Its absence does not improve your choice. He raised his eyes. Arabella is going to testify? Yes. Then the committee will ask what I knew. They should. Julian stared at Benedict's letter. What will you tell them? The truth, that you did not design the scheme, but knowingly supplied the false accusation, the forged security, and the authority it required. A parliamentary summons lay waiting beside Eleanor's hand. The hearing would begin the following morning, and Julian would be required to answer first. Julian entered the parliamentary chamber alone. Eleanor sat opposite him with Sir Matthew, Thomas Wren, and the receiver appointed over the Harcourt records. Arabella waited in an adjoining room, under the protection of a magistrate. The committee chairman placed the forged letters before Julian. Do you maintain that your wife committed adultery with Thomas Wren? Julian looked at Eleanor. She offered him neither encouragement nor mercy. No, he said. The accusation was false. A murmur moved through the chamber. Did Benedict Shaw deceive you into believing these letters were genuine? He claimed they had been verified. Then you were also his victim? Julian's fingers tightened against the table. No, I chose not to examine them, because they gave me the divorce I wanted. The chamber became silent. Julian admitted that Eleanor had saved the Harcourt estates repeatedly during their marriage. Her competence had earned the trust of creditors, stewards, and tenants, but instead of valuing it, he had resented his dependence upon her. When Benedict offered him Arabella's supposed fortune, Julian accepted the false accusation as a means of replacing Eleanor. Did you know your wife had not consented to the Westmere mortgage? The chairman asked. Yes. Yet you signed it? Yes. Why? I was told Arabella's fortune would repay the loan before the security could be enforced. The chairman lifted the agreement recovered from the fire. And the £5,000 promised to you. Julian lowered his eyes. I accepted it in exchange for surrendering Eleanor's claim after the divorce. Eleanor felt no triumph. His admission simply stripped away the excuses he had used to disguise a deliberate choice. Thomas testified next. He identified the false securities and the payments made to the two servants who supported the adultery claim. The receiver presented Benedict's instructions to burn the original registers. Eleanor then placed the canal map before the committee. Westmere was the only independently protected property dividing this route, she explained. Removing me through a false divorce allowed Benedict to join the 6 parcels and sell the corridor. Arabella was called last. She admitted knowing the letters were false. She had agreed to marry Julian because Benedict promised her £20,000 from the corridor sale. She also confirmed that the Vale fortune consisted almost entirely of borrowed money moved among insolvent companies. Her testimony did not excuse her. It completed the scheme. The committee suspended Julian's divorce petition and referred the forged evidence, bribery, and destruction of records to the criminal courts. Parliament would publish a preliminary declaration stating that no credible evidence of Eleanor's adultery existed. Outside the chamber, reporters surrounded Julian. He could have escaped through a private corridor. Instead, he stopped before them. My wife was innocent, he said. I used unverified evidence against her because I wanted another woman's supposed fortune. Benedict Shaw exploited my vanity, but he did not create it. Eleanor passed without acknowledging him. That evening, she enforced the cross-default clauses attached to the Harcourt mortgages. A court-appointed receiver was authorized to take control of Harcourt House, Dunleigh Mill, and the income from the northern farms when the deadline expired. Julian came to Ashford Bank shortly before midnight. The petition has been suspended, he said. There can be no wedding. The investors have already gathered at Harcourt House. Benedict promised that your marriage would make their worthless shares respectable. Arabella will not appear. Yes, she will. Julian stared at her. Eleanor handed him the final default notice. Tomorrow morning, she will tell them the Vale fortune never existed. At the same hour, the receiver will take possession of every Harcourt asset covered by these debts. You planned this before the hearing. I prepared for the possibility that you would choose the lie. At 9 o'clock the following morning, the hour printed on Julian's wedding invitations, his creditors would learn that the heiress owned nothing, and Julian would be required to surrender the keys to the house from which he had expelled his lawful wife. Harcourt House was filled with guests who did not yet know there would be no wedding. Benedict's investors crowded the ballroom beside merchants, creditors, and political allies. They had been told the parliamentary delay was a formality, and that Arabella's fortune would secure every veil obligation before noon. At 9 o'clock, Arabella appeared in her wedding gown. Julian waited beneath the chandeliers but made no attempt to approach her. Arabella stopped before the assembled guests. "There is no veil fortune," she announced. "The ships are mortgaged, the companies are insolvent, and the money used to purchase Harcourt debts was itself borrowed." The confidence in the room collapsed. Several investors demanded their deposits. Others turned toward Julian, believing his title still offered protection. Then the opposite doors opened. Eleanor entered with Sir Matthew, the court-appointed receiver, 2 solicitors, and bailiffs carrying formal notices of possession. The receiver read the judgment aloud. Fraud affecting the Westmere security had activated the cross-default clauses. Harcourt House, Dunleigh Mill, the Northern Farm income, and Julian's private investments would pass into receivership until the debts were settled. "This house belongs to a duke," one investor protested. "The title is not mortgaged," Eleanor replied. "The house is." The first notice was fixed across Julian's study doors. The second transferred Dunleigh's income to the receiver. The third authorized the sale of his racing stable and other unentailed property. Julian watched the consequences arrive in the same room where servants had removed Eleanor's portrait. "What happens to the mill workers?" he asked. "Their wages have already been placed in trust," Eleanor said. "And the tenants? Their leases remain protected. I am collecting from you, not from them." That distinction silenced him. Arabella surrendered Benedict's account books to the magistrate. 3 investors whose names appeared in the fraudulent corridor agreements were detained for questioning. The remaining guests left past the reporters gathered outside. No marriage took place. In the entrance hall, the receiver requested the keys to Harcourt House. Julian removed them from his coat. 9 years earlier, Eleanor had helped him preserve this house. Weeks earlier, he had expelled her from it with a single trunk. Now he placed the keys in her hand. "You bought only 3 of my debts," he said. "I bought the 3 that controlled everything else." By evening, Julian retained his title and the entailed central portion of Harcourt Abbey, but little private income with which to maintain them. Eleanor controlled the assets he had pledged, while Arabella owned a collection of nearly worthless gambling notes. Eleanor ordered the receiver to pay workers before distributing money to any investor. She then directed that Westmere be removed permanently from every Harcourt security. Julian stood beneath the empty space where her portrait had hung. "Is this what you wanted?" "No," she said. "I wanted you to tell the truth before any of this became necessary." He lowered his gaze. "What remains for me to do?" Eleanor handed him a written declaration and opened the front doors. Outside waited the tenants, estate officers and reporters, who had printed his accusation. "You destroyed my name publicly," she said. "You will restore it the same way." Julian stepped through the open doors and faced the tenants, estate officers, and reporters gathered outside Harcourt House. He held Eleanor's declaration but did not read from it. "My wife committed no adultery," he said. "I knew the evidence against her had not been properly examined. I used it because I wanted Arabella Vale's supposed fortune, and because I resented owing my estate's survival to Eleanor's judgment." The reporters recorded every word. Julian admitted signing the Westmere mortgage, despite knowing Eleanor had withheld consent. He acknowledged the promised payment of £5,000 and accepted responsibility for giving Benedict control of his seal and records. "Benedict Shaw exploited my choices," he said. "He did not make them for me." Julian then signed away every claim to Eleanor's inheritance, future earnings, and banking interests. His remaining private assets were transferred into a restitution fund for the workers, tenants, and creditors harmed by the fraud. He offered Eleanor the signed declaration. She accepted the document, not his hand. Months later, Benedict was convicted of fraud, forgery, bribery, destruction of evidence, and arson. His companies were dissolved, and their remaining assets were distributed among the defrauded investors. Arabella pleaded guilty to conspiracy and knowingly supporting false testimony. Her cooperation spared her imprisonment, but she lost every claim to the Vale companies and remained under court supervision. Thomas Wren's name was publicly cleared. Eleanor appointed him chief auditor of the new Westmere Trust. Parliament formally declared the adultery accusation fraudulent. At Eleanor's request, it ended her marriage to Julian, while confirming that she had entered and left it without misconduct. Julian retained his title and the entailed portion of Harcourt Abbey, but little income with which to maintain either. He sold his horses, abandoned his political ambitions, and moved into the smallest habitable wing. A fixed share of his remaining income went directly to restitution. He never asked Eleanor to return. Eleanor combined Westmere, Dunleigh Mill, and the recovered Harcourt properties into a professionally managed trust. Tenant leases were secured, workers received a share of the mill's profits, and no property could again be pledged without independent review. 1 year later, the directors of Ashford Bank elected Eleanor to lead its landed investments, not because Sir Matthew offered her the position, but because Westmere had become the bank's most stable and profitable trust. She returned to Harcourt House on the anniversary of the wedding that never occurred. The last receivership notice had been removed from the entrance. A servant asked where she wished to hang the portrait Julian had ordered taken down. Not in the ballroom. Eleanor placed it in the public accounts room, where tenants could enter without bowing. Then she set her single trunk beside the desk. It was the same trunk Julian had allowed her to carry away when he believed he had discarded a penniless wife. Eleanor opened it, removed the old Harcourt ledgers, and laid them beneath a brass nameplate bearing her own name. For 9 years, her work had been hidden behind her husband's title. From that day forward, every account would show who had truly built it.